This is the Regained Wellness Podcast with Jamie Logie, episode 43, The Dorito Effect with Mark Schatzker. Hey guys, what's happening? Welcome back to the podcast. I'm Jamie Logie. I run regainedwellness.com, and this is the Regained Wellness Podcast. And thank you so much for joining me today. And we got a beauty of an episode here. It's a book that just came out called The Dorito Effect by Mark Schatzker, who's a fellow Canadian. And it's one of the best books I've ever read. And it has to do with the issue of flavor and food. And why do we want to keep eating certain foods? Because they have these flavors built into them. But why are these flavors so powerful? And what's the connection they have to making us want to eat more or eat just enough or not eat anything? And the issue surrounding artificial flavors and natural flavors, and how natural flavors aren't all they're cracked up to be. And there's the same amount of science that goes behind a natural flavor, and they trick your senses. It goes through the history of all these different developments in flavor technology. It looks at the issues of why our foods have been so overbred, but they've been kind of dialed back as far as taste goes. They've been like growing larger and quicker, and flavor has been sacrificed. So when you think of you're eating, say you have this giant grocery store apple you've eaten, and remember they're, sometimes so tasteless, you wonder what you're actually eating. So this book dives into all those issues and the development of all these tastes that we've now associated with other foods that aren't their original taste to begin with, and how our senses have been tricked, how it causes us to become addicted because of these artificial flavors and ingredients they've added in. And there's just so much insight and so many different stories into the history of this whole issue. You'll read through it in one sitting. Like, I've already read it twice within a couple days. And so had Mark on to talk in more detail about some of the issues that are covered in the book. You'll learn a lot. This is one of those episodes, again, I like to say you'll download, you want to go back and listen to a few times because there's lots of gold just in this one episode. So I will let Mark take it away. Mark Schatzker is an award-winning writer based in Toronto. He's a fellow Canuck. Like me, he is a radio columnist for the Canadian Broadcast Corporation and a frequent contributor to Globe and Mail, Condé Nast Traveler, and Bloomberg Pursuits. Welcome, Mark. How are you?
Great. Thank you for having me.
Good. So the book, The Dorito Effect, phenomenal book. Can't stress it enough that everyone should be reading this, whether you're involved in nutrition or just from like the layperson. Before we get to the details, what inspired you to write the book? What sort of kicked that off?
Well, I guess the same thing that inspired me to be originally a food writer, which is the way food tastes. We are all drawn to food. We all love food. But for some reason, we never really talk about flavor. We are obsessed by nutrients, carbs, fat, sugar. And yet flavor has this grip on our brains. We crave it, we think about it, and I basically just started thinking about it. Why do we like food, and what is the relationship between the way food tastes and what it does to our body?
Yeah. So this whole story is interesting because we're talking about the Dorito effect, and if people are wondering, is this a book about chips? The Dorito effect kind of kicked off this whole flavor movement, and it started with basically the word taco. So can you explain how that all came through?
Yeah, absolutely. But you make a good point. The book is not all about chips. The book is what chips tell us about what happened to food, and that's why I called it the Dorito effect. What most people don't know about Doritos is that they almost bombed. They might not have been here today except for a brilliant insight on the part of their creator, a guy named Arch West. When Frito-Lay first brought Doritos to market, they were just a salted tortilla chip. And they didn't sell very well. In the Southwest, like in Texas and California, people knew that you could dip Doritos or tortilla chips into guacamole or salsa or a bean dip, and they did okay there. But everywhere else, people said, well, these things sound Mexican, but they don't taste Mexican. And that's when this guy, Arch West, had his brilliant moment of insight, which is to say, let's flavor them to taste like a taco. Now, this was in the early 60s, and that technology had finally come online. It was finally possible. We knew enough about flavor technology to do that. In the 40s or the 50s or the 30s, if you wanted to make a taco, Or if you wanted to make a tortilla chip taste like a taco, well, you'd have to put like ground beef on it, or pork and chopped onions and that sort of thing. But now we just knew what the flavorings were, and we could just add those chemicals to a tortilla chip to give it the same savory zing as a taco. It didn't taste exactly like a taco, but it tasted good. These chemicals made these tortilla chips taste delicious, taste irresistible, and that's when the Dorito really was born.
Yeah.
That's when it became the smash hit that it is. This tells us two things. First of all, it tells us how powerful flavor technology is to get us to eat food, to like food. But it also tells us the story of what happened to food in general, because we're now putting the same kind of stuff we put on potato chips and Doritos, we're putting it everywhere. And in that way, we're incentivizing ourselves to eat the wrong food. Flavor really tells us everything about where food went wrong and what we need to do to fix it.
Awesome. So I guess jumping into it then, they were creating these flavors like really never existed before. So there's a lot of confusion behind everyone, sees artificial flavor and they're like, oh, okay, that's something fake to stay away from. How is natural flavor actually kind of in that same category, and what that has to do with things like gas chromatographs and all that science?
Yeah, okay, so let me get into the science of it. The actual compounds that are in food, let's say in an orange or in a cherry or a steak or a strawberry, the compounds that make it taste the way it tastes, there's hardly any of them in there. They are microscopic. And for decades, despite the fact that we've been pretty good at chemistry for, like 150 years, for a long, long time, no one had any idea what it was inside an orange that made it taste like an orange. Finally, in 1955, the first gas chromatograph went on sale commercially, and this is a machine that lets you analyze all the chemicals inside something. So now you could take a little bit of orange juice or orange oil or strawberry or steak and put it in a gas chromatograph, and all the different compounds would come marching out the other end, and then you could analyze them and figure out what they were, and pretty soon you could say, well, I don't need an orange to make something taste like an orange because I figured out the chemicals in an orange that make it taste like an orange. And very quickly, we began producing these flavor chemicals industrially and adding them to all sorts of things. The Dorito is one of the earliest, most successful examples, but it's happened with everything. It's all over the place. Now, a lot of the time, people look suspiciously on an ingredient panel and they see the word artificial flavors and they get scared and they think, ooh, these chemicals are going to get inside my brain or they're going to give me cancer. But then they might see another one next to it that says all natural flavoring and they think, oh, nature, this is healthy, this is good for me. The truth is there is no difference between these chemicals. Artificial flavors and natural flavors, chemically speaking, are virtually identical. It's kind of like it's more like word trickery. It has to do with how they're made. So you might make a natural flavor by using distillation or putting something in a centrifuge or using a yeast. So we tend to think of these things as natural, whatever that means. I don't know why. I don't know why harvesting chemicals from a yeast in a factory is natural. Even though yeast exists in nature, that doesn't make it natural. But for whatever reason, the government lets this happen. If you look at a vial of natural flavorings, it is a clear liquid, and so are artificial flavorings. Chemically speaking, it's the same stuff. So I would just tell people, don't believe the word natural in that context. There's nothing in that context. There's nothing natural about it.
I think it's probably one of the best scam marketing things that ever existed for food, that you can slap natural flavor on, and you have this image that it's like been hand picked and hand squeezed or something ridiculous like that. With the different, with artificial flavors and natural flavors, if they list an artificial flavor, that's just sort of the tip of the iceberg. There can be a ton of compounds. Yes, it's just two words that essentially are incredibly deceptive. Sometimes the list of actual flavorings is so long. You'd need a binder to print it all out. They're very complex chemicals. They're not dangerous in any way in terms of being toxic. A lot of people get frightened when they see these complex chemical names. These things do exist in real food, so I don't believe they're toxic in the sense that they will give you cancer.
My belief is the problem with them is that they incentivize you to eat food you wouldn't ordinarily eat. That's the problem. They make food taste delicious. And that's the problem we have is we're eating too much. And if you look at how we've incentivized food, that's going to tell you an awful lot about why people are making these terrible eating choices.
Yeah, page 17, I think you said you're like, when you're talking about obviously there's an obesity problem, all like diabetes, health, all sorts of problems. Page 17, you said the problem isn't calories and what our body does with them necessarily. The problem is we want to eat the wrong thing. So can you explain a little more on that?
Yeah, well, listen, we've had for about 50 years a sort of nutrient war. We've been dragging various nutrients into these sort of public kangaroo courts, and we convicted fat. You know, fat was the number one evil.
Yeah.
And then we turned our sights on carbs, and carbs were terrible. Now we're getting really angry about sugar. What's very interesting to contemplate is that in the 1950s and 60s, when we were relatively trim compared to today, there was fat, there were carbs. You could go buy sugar at the supermarket. This stuff didn't all get invented in the late 70s. But we weren't consuming that much. We've had this kind of ongoing war, and even the scientists disagree. You know, what does a carb do once it gets inside your system versus a fat? And there are some minor differences, but I think these differences are minor. I think the real question is behavioral, which is why did we decide to eat more? And that's where flavor comes in. We have to understand obesity as a behavioral problem and not a nutritional problem. And the question is what is producing this behavior? And that's where flavor becomes so interesting, because even though we ignore it from a nutritional point of view, because all those natural flavorings and artificial flavorings are completely non-caloric. Yeah. You could eat them by the bucketful. You wouldn't gain weight. But why they're so important is they help us understand why we like food. So if you took, for example, the flavorings out of potato chips and tortilla chips, and you took the flavorings out of like soft drinks, nobody would eat them. It's the flavorings that make them taste delicious, and this helps us understand why people are doing it. In fact, beneath all that comes this really big question: what are flavorings and why do they exist? And that's where this discussion really opens up and becomes so interesting. The truth is, flavors are there for a really important reason. If you look at your DNA, there's more DNA devoted to writing your flavor system than any other part of your body. So evolution considered it very, very important. When we were out there living in the jungle or running around the savannah, we really needed this flavor system. And the reason is that flavors are cues for nutrients. It's how our bodies know and remember where the nutrients are. Yeah. So that when we run around the forest, this is before we had PhDs in nutrition, and we could meet our needs, our very diverse and differing needs for minerals, for vitamins, for protein, for energy. Flavor is how we remembered, and how we knew something. When something tasted delicious, it's because it was good for us. Yeah. So if you look, for example, at a tomato, the reason we love tomatoes is because the flavors in a tomato are a cue. They're telling us there's nutrients in this tomato. There's very good science on this. So that's why it's there. It's a system that worked brilliantly for thousands and thousands and thousands of years, and it's really gotten out of whack only since we had this ability to start inventing flavors ourselves.
Yeah. So talking about what you call nutritional wisdom then, and the fact that the flavor and nutrition kind of go together, talk about some of the studies that were done with that you cover in the book about with the goats and that idea of nutritional wisdom.
Yeah, nutritional wisdom is an important phrase. It's been out of fashion for decades now, but it is the idea that our palate, our desires, what we feel like eating, has some relationship to what our bodies need. We have gone so far away from this that we think flavor is the devil. We have sayings like, if it tastes good, spit it out. But when you think about it, you're like, well, why? I mean, that doesn't make sense. Why would we be programmed to poison ourselves? That makes absolutely no sense. So there's a researcher at Utah State University named Fred Provenza who did some fascinating experiments with goats and with sheep that really shed light on why we have this flavor system. So I'll tell you about one of them. He did an experiment with sheep. Imagine two pens with each has 10 sheep in it. Fred Provenza intentionally makes those sheep deficient in phosphorus. Phosphorus is an essential mineral. Yeah. If you don't get enough phosphorus, eventually you'll die, and so will sheep. It is essential to life. Well, pretty soon these sheep aren't feeling so well, and they really, really want phosphorus. And this is what Fred does. One day, he gives them a coconut-flavored feed. And right after they've eaten it, he puts a tube down their throat and drenches their stomach with phosphorus. So what he's trying to do is create an association between the flavor coconut, and the coconut flavoring has no phosphorus in it, and the nutritional infusion of phosphorus. The next day, he gives the sheep a maple-flavored feed. But instead of giving them the phosphorus in their stomach, he just gives them water. In that way, he's associating the flavor of maple with water. Mm-hmm. Well, he's done this for a while, and pretty soon what he finds is that when these sheep are deficient in phosphorus, what do they want? They want coconut, because their body has established a relationship. It knows that when I taste coconut, I get phosphorus, and that's what I need. Now, I know you might be thinking, you might go, well, how do we know that sheep just don't love coconut? Because, gosh, who doesn't love coconut, right? Yeah. Well, that's where the other pen of sheep comes in. And in that pen, he reversed it. In that pen, when the sheep got the coconut-flavored feed, they got the water in their stomach. Right. And when they got the maple-flavored feed, that's when they got the phosphorus. And guess what? In that pen, the phosphorus-deficient sheep craved maple. So what he showed is that there is a relationship between the way food tastes and the nutrition that it delivers. And this, when you think about it, makes total sense, because we needed a system, as we evolved, we needed a system to sense what was in food before we ate it and while we ate it. And that's why the smell of food tells us a lot about it before we eat it, and the taste of it while we're eating it tells us so much about it. It's a system that works. It works. It works really well. That's why goats are able to live on the side of a mountain and get the protein they need and the energy and the phosphorus and the calcium. It just really starts to get out of whack when you start to doctor those chemical flavorings in all sorts of ways, because you make a food taste good, but it's telling a nutritional lie. That's the problem.
Wow. There's so many amazing studies and things you reference in this book that honestly blow people's minds here. You touched on smell here. I wrote a blog a while back on, sort of this same subject and artificial flavors, and finding that a majority of all the flavors, artificial flavors, are created in New Jersey. There's so many of these big chemical factories, and they're the same places that are making a lot of like perfumes and things that go into, making air fresheners smell good. What's more of the relation with the smell in our noses and how that works with flavor?
Yes, this is always a shocker to most people, and they have a tough time accepting it, but flavor is aroma. That's why flavor companies are also scent companies. The companies that sell flavorings to, General Foods and Kraft and McDonald's are the same companies that sell scents to Calvin Klein and Chanel. And it's because flavors are aromas. This seems bizarre because you're like, well, what are you talking about? I taste food in my mouth, on my tongue, and you do. That's where your brain places the experience. But so your tongue only registers the basic taste, which is sweet, salty, bitter, sour, and umami. That gives you important information about food, and food wouldn't taste like food without that stuff. Mm-hmm. But as we all know, if you have a cold, food tastes really bland, and that's because your nose. So much of the complexity and nuance and character of food comes through your nose. And the way it works is, there's that weird hole in the back of your throat where your nose connects to your mouth. Mm-hmm. The aroma of what you're eating wafts up that and swirls in your nasal cavity, firing aroma receptors. In fact, you're better at smelling food through the back of your nose than you are through the front of your nose. It makes no sense. Yeah. People can't believe it, but it's true. And that's why when you eat food, so much of that character is actually being told, it's being registered by your nose.
Wow. Speaking of the smell thing, there's this... Tell this story about whenever you go into a restaurant that serves like some sort of Mexican fajitas that comes sizzling out to the table. What's actually happening there?
It's I visited a food company that develops these things, and they told me. I mean, I guess I never stopped to think about it, but they said one of the things they developed was the fajita moment. When you're in like one of those casual restaurants. You're sitting there having a beer with a friend, and the waiter or waitress walks by with this sizzling platter of fajitas, that has been totally engineered. They've created a sauce that magnifies the sizzle and magnifies the aroma, so that when the waiter walks by, you hear it, you smell it, and you go, I want to have fajitas. That's a good indicator for how good they are at essentially manipulating us.
I
People
think,
wouldn't eat nearly as many fajitas if not for that essentially fajita technology.
Yeah, the sizzle factor. I think I came across this as well with not just say McDonald's, but other fast food places with the same kind of aromas added into their cooking oil to give off that like fry smell that it's not necessarily the potato. I don't know. It's just something I sort of stumbled across. I don't know if that's along the same lines as the fajita thing.
This stuff is happening everywhere, and we have a very limited idea of how common it is. One of the problems with restaurants is they don't print their ingredients.
Yes.
But the only ones that did that I could find, and I'll give them full credit, is McDonald's. And if you look for the words artificial or natural flavor in the list of McDonald's ingredients, it is everywhere. It stunned me how many ingredients this stuff is showing up in. But don't bet that McDonald's is the only one doing this.
Yeah.
Everyone is doing it. And I think one of the things people need to realize, we love to beat up on McDonald's. Lots of restaurants are following exactly the same model. Lots of sit-down restaurants where you think your food is being prepared in the kitchen. It's more like it's being assembled. It was cooked off premises, and it's just assembled by really low-wage workers in a, quote, kitchen. And it's not real. The flavor is not the product of artful cuisine.
No.
It was created in a lab and, spritzed on in a factory.
Yeah. I have a friend, like I said, Mark and I are both from Canada, and there's a few chain restaurants that are around here. I won't mention names. And I had a friend who got a job as a chef cook, or whatever they want to call him, at one of these places. The guy he couldn't make grilled cheese. He had no idea. He left the place still with no concept of food. He's basically like, you use a box cutter, and then it's just like, it's more of a preparation thing. And we see these sit down, like, everyone like bashes fast food. And then there's any like chain sit down restaurants, it's essentially the same thing. And you think
it is fast food, except they're just charging you double for it. And it's true for like a lot of pubs and cafeterias.
Yeah.
Why is it that all chicken wings and Caesar salads taste the same?
Right.
It's not because everyone's following some great recipe. It's because this stuff is all coming out of a package.
Yeah.
In fact, they don't even call them recipes. They call them operational guidelines.
Wow.
It's quite depressing when you think about it. And it's unfortunate because it's, there are people out there with cooking talent who, I'd love them to cook me dinner. Unfortunately, I can't get that. I can only get something out of a box, right?
Yeah.
If you go to a restaurant.
Yeah.
Well, I don't want to say all restaurants, but so many, right?
No,
many restaurants, especially chain restaurants.
And because flavor is paramount. If something obviously isn't good, they've got a bottom line to hit money wise, so they can't compromise. Like if you go to any of these places, I say like, or again, fast food. If you have like a fry there, they taste the same everywhere you go in any country. Where it's if you have a potato, it can be different every time. If it's a locally grown, like natural raised organic potato, the flavor can absolutely vary. It's very interesting stuff here when you talk about in the book about chicken and what the chicken we're actually eating today is and how it's kind of evolved and been created as well. Can you get into that?
Yeah, the chicken, I say this, and most people are struck by it, but I would say most people today have never tasted chicken.
Yeah.
You're going to say, well, what are you talking about? I eat chicken all the time. But chicken tastes nothing like it used to. Chicken today tastes of nothing. It tastes like cardboard. It tastes like what you put on it, and that's why we have to so aggressively season chicken or dump sauces on it. About 60 years ago, a chicken took about 16 weeks to get big. You didn't kill it till it was around 16 weeks old. It spent its life, for the first portion of its life, it was indoors because it was a little chick and, needed to stay warm. But then it would go outside. It would eat bugs and blades of grass and grasshoppers, whatever a chicken could get its beak on.
Yeah.
It truly was a free-range chicken. The dark meat was quite dark. The white meat was white. The skin was yellow. And it had a profoundly chickeny flavor. If you've ever eaten one of these chickens, and most people haven't, they are incredible. But there was a big contest in 1948 called the Chicken of Tomorrow Contest, which was designed to get everyone to compete to see who could grow the fastest growing, plumpest chicken. And the winner came in around 12 weeks, and we just have not looked back. The chickens we eat today are 6 weeks or younger. they don't go outside anymore. They sit indoors and they eat an unending supply of corn and soybeans. They're giant babies. They're full of water, and they taste like nothing.
Yeah.
And also their blandness. This is the reason we need to think about nutrition and flavor, is because their flavor, their blandness is an indicator for what happened to them nutritionally. Chickens are higher in fat than they used to be, and they're not as nutrient dense, not as many omega-3s, not as many vitamins. It literally is closer to cardboard, like a high-calorie cardboard. And that's a problem because the chicken we eat now just isn't satisfying. About 50% of it is called further processed, which means it goes to one of those factories where it's breaded. We eat a ton of chicken fingers and chicken strips.
Yeah.
There's flavorings added. We eat chicken burgers. So we think of chicken as this like low-fat food. It's not. We've turned it into Doritos to make it palatable, and we've altered our relationship with it. It doesn't taste that good, and yet we've sprinkled it with chemicals that make us just want to keep eating it and keep eating it.
And the omega-6 content has gone up a lot more.
It's like through the roof.
Yeah,
it's unbelievable. When you look at the omega-6 to omega-3 ratio in chicken, I mean, it can get as high as 40-1. It's really bad. Yeah.
So like with people listening, like you need some omega-6 and 3, but you need that in a good balance. And when the 6 gets out of proportion, it can lead to your own inflammation and all that. And people always think, chicken is perfectly clean, lean, that whole deal. What was it? What was the term Julia Child used to find chicken back?
Oh, she compared it to it's interesting because our food has been slowly going down in quality, and everyone says, well, why hasn't anyone noticed? And I always say, well, people did notice. Just read the cookbooks. And Julia Child was an early one in 1961 or 62. I can't remember the year. She said, I'm almost quoting directly. She said, modern farming has done wonders to create a plump, fast-growing bird, but basically they taste like teddy bear stuffing. She noticed it even back then.
So I've done a lot of traveling. One of my hands down my favorite country, Italy.
Yes.
It's a culinary destination. The best meals I've ever had in my life, all over the place. Discuss about Italy and their situation with food and the fact, they don't have that obesity problem per se, and what's going on in Italy.
Well, Italy, I think, is it's teaching us something very important about food and how we're getting food wrong. We constantly tell ourselves that the reason we have this obesity epidemic in North America is because of an overabundance of highly palatable food. And by highly palatable, these people are referring to potato chips, soft drinks, ice cream, Twinkies, all the rest of it. If you ask me, I don't think these foods are all that palatable. I personally think they taste kind of gross.
Mm-hmm.
But what's interesting to me about Italy, the food in Italy is better. It just across the board tastes better. It's often challenging to get a bad meal there.
Yeah, exactly.
And I've had meals that weren't particularly expensive that were so good they almost moved me to tears. I mean, really, really delicious food. Delicious in an honest and simple and in a way that's like it speaks right to your soul. I've had similar experiences in Japan. I was absolutely struck by the incredible quality of food in Japan. I even bought food on a train in Japan, which is something I would never do here. And I couldn't believe I was eating raw fish on a train, and it was wonderful, which I just cannot conceive of that. But what's interesting, in these two countries where the food is, not only is the food great, but the people are passionate about food. I mean, you can find melons in Tokyo selling for $600. Now, that's not, all melons don't cost that, but that tells you just how ridiculous the Japanese take ingredient quality. Well, you would think if obesity was directly related to the deliciousness of food, then the world's fattest people are going to be in Italy and Japan because they have the best food. Guess what? They don't. Their rates of obesity are a fraction of what they are here. So what they're actually telling us is great news. We can have a wonderful relationship with food in which food is delicious and it's craveable, and guess what? It's not deadly. What it all comes down to is the difference between real flavor and synthetic flavor, which is to say the foods that they prize have real flavor. The flavor comes from the farm.
Yeah.
It comes from the animal that they grew or the plant that they grew. The flavor does not come from a chemical factory. And that is the key difference, because in real foods, there is this fundamental connection between flavor and nutrition. And those delicious foods not only delight them as they're eating, but truly satisfies them.
Yeah.
And that's what we're missing. We're suspicious of pleasure, and we get into this relationship of eating food that doesn't satisfy us, so we keep eating and eating. So my advice is, if we want to get people to eat better, we have to make the food taste more like it does in Italy and Japan.
Yeah.
We have to make the whole foods that we grow taste more like they did when our grandparents were eating.
Yeah.
When they were young and fit and vigorous, and they weren't, binging on Twinkies and stuff like that. Now, the good news is we can do that. It doesn't mean going back to an heirloom system where chickens cost $30 and tomatoes cost $6 a pound. We can get flavor into our food. It's going to cost a bit more than it costs now, but it's not going to cost outrageously more. So I see this as being incredibly important.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Like, I remember I've been to some pretty good restaurants, and whether it's Toronto or New York, where you've spent hundreds. The best meal I can remember was in the Chianti region in Italy, where they were making their own mozzarella. They had wild boar that they were making into these like sandwiches with their own pressed olive oil, and I think the meal cost me €3, which is like what, $6?
I know,
give
exactly.
Or take,
it's the same price as fast food.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
So much better.
It's unbelievable. Just interesting thing here. I mean, yeah, we'll start wrapping up. This could go on for hours and hours. There's so much good stuff in this book. The one thing I found really amazing was how companies are creating not just fake flavors, but they're creating feelings in food. And some of the foods we're eating is because it's like they've created this specific emotion depending on like if you're a younger guy or whatever. Can you talk a little about that?
Yeah, well, these are smart people, and they do a ton of research, and what they know is that flavor reaches right back into a very primitive part of your brain, that the emotional part of your brain.
Yeah.
Flavor, it affects what psychologists call the affective part of your mind, which is how you feel about something. It's similar to music. When you hear a song, you know immediately, if I play you a chord, you know immediately if that's a happy chord or a sad chord.
Right,
it's the same with flavor. As soon as you eat something, you might not even be able to place it. You might not be like, is that cinnamon? Is that sage? I don't know. But you do know, I like this or I don't like this. Flavors immediately produce what's called an affective response, a feeling. And these companies have basically laid it all out. They know that, well, if we use these flavorings, it makes people feel happy and relaxed. These flavorings make people feel edgy and thrilled and like taking a risk.
Yeah.
So they design food products that will appeal to certain demographic groups, or they'll appeal to like a sports bar, let's say, versus a wellness spa. In a wellness spa, you might want flavors that are more like cinnamon, maybe chai, something like that. In a sports bar, you want chili, you want a bit of brown sugar, you want bold, you want to go for it. The reason flavors have this hold over us is, like I said, because in a natural context, they tell us important things about the food we're eating. It's when we get really good at manipulating that we create food. And this is the thing. I mean, we always want to criticize junk food as not tasting great. I don't like it that much. But the truth is, it does work. These chemicals make food taste good. Kids in particular love it. And that's how we've incentivized ourselves to eat food that without the flavorings, we just wouldn't eat.
Yeah. And it's like those first bites or first sips, they're always good. You know what I mean? To kind of hook
It's
you
usually
in.
towards the end of the meal that the regret settles in and you go, oh my God, what have I done, right?
The whole flavor, or sorry, like the flavor, emotion, feeling connection just reminded me, like while I was reading it, as the show Mad Men has just finished this week of the series, and like how they're, as an advertising agency, their idea was to always sell the feeling, like to sell that experience. And then I was just thinking, these are the people who are physically making that feeling, and
something, they know what they're doing. And this is part of the problem, is that we think we're so smart, that we're rational beings in control of ourselves. The reason so many diets fail is because they don't taste good. It's the same as teaching abstinence education. It doesn't work. Humans, we're animals. We are wired for pleasure. And we find the pleasure. And if Whole Foods tastes like cardboard and junk food tastes great, guess what people are going to do? They're going to eat the junk food. We know this. We've tried putting like sliced vegetables in cafeterias, and the kids still go for the French fries and the frozen pizzas because they go for where the pleasure is. We have to get pleasure into healthy food. It's just not going to work otherwise. We have 50 years of data, and we know it won't work.
Yeah, unbelievable. Well, we'll start wrapping up here. Mark, this is amazing. All this information. I'll link the book on the show notes for this episode. Where else can people find out about you, follow you, all that stuff?
I have a website, markschatzker.com, so MarkSchatz or Z KER.com. The book is for sale on Amazon. It's in all the big stores. It's out there. Read it, enjoy it.
Please buy this book, everybody. Okay, so to finish off, I always just do a quick little rapid fire favorite type thing. So if you're ready, favorite TV show.
Favorite TV show, Game of Thrones.
Nice. Favorite band or music?
The music of Jerry Garcia.
Awesome. Favorite sports team?
The Toronto Blue Jays.
Okay. Favorite movie?
Oh, boy. Tough one. I'm going to go with The Big Lebowski.
Awesome. Favorite book? That might be a tough one, too.
Oh, that is a tough one. The writing, the nonfiction of John McPhee, for anyone who's never read it, is unbelievable. I'd recommend a book called Pieces of the Frame. The first essay in that book is mind-blowing.
John McPhee, cool. Okay, and last one. If you could only eat one meal for the rest of your life, what would it be?
Ooh, wow. I had a meal at a place called Asador Exabari in Spain, which I'm still thinking about it. It was an incredible meal. So I'll eat that meal every day for the rest of my life.
What was in that one?
Well, it was like one of those 13-course meals, they picked mushrooms, on the hillside, and very simple, just put mushrooms on toast. You'd think give me a break. No, it was on cracker. Unbelievable. They cured their own anchovies. Incredible. They did a very simple oyster that was wonderful, and then they built up to this incredible grilled steak. It was just a magical, awesome meal. I will never forget it.
I know. That's the thing. No one ever forgets a good meal. You know what I mean? Those ones stay with you forever. Okay, Mark, thanks so much for doing this. Really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
Okay, and that is how you do that. Amazing stuff from Mark. Please go pick this book up. It's on Amazon. You can buy it in the bookstores, everything. I'll put links and everything to the book, to Mark, where you can follow him, everything like that, on the show notes today, which is regainedwellness.com/043. So you can see everything there. So thank you so much for listening. Hope you got a lot out of this topic. This is one of my favorite areas of nutrition because there's so much that goes into it. There's so much manipulation and creation, and when it comes to profits and the bottom line, nothing can be left to chance. So there's such precision that goes in behind the creation of products and flavors and stuff like that. And like we were both saying, the more you can get away from that processed manufactured food concoctions and get back into real food, the better your overall health for it. So again, thanks for listening today. If you like this episode, make sure to subscribe on the old iTunes machine, and that way you get all the shows automatically sent to you. If you do like the show, make sure to leave a rating and review. It helps the show get spread and in front of more people. It makes my mom more proud of me, and that all works out perfectly for everybody. And if you haven't already, make sure to sign up for the Regain Wellness mailing list, where when you sign up, I send off a free ebook called the Healthy Eating Starter Kit. So it's a little more information on those foods you want to start including in your diet, a little more details into those things, and a few recipes to get you going. And you can get that by going to regainedwellness.com/guide, and that's sent right off to you. And then it keeps you up to date with everything going on and information I only share through email and different topics and whatnot. So that's it from me. Remember, in your health goals, your pursuits, your fitness, your wellness, whatever it is, in the long run, remember, it's always about progress and not perfection. See you next time.